Okay, everyone, Bruchim Habayim, B'Shem Hashem Na'aseh V'Natzliach. B'Ezras Hashem, tonight we are continuing our Halichot Bat Yisrael, studying the laws of Pesach as it is rapidly approaching. Quite amazing that we're at that time of year, Baruch Hashem. And tonight we are sponsored Le'ilui Nishmat Giti Bat Yaakov by the Choramian family. May her neshama go higher and higher in Gan Eden. Tonight is her Shloshim. And may she be Melitzat Yosher for her family and for all of Am Yisrael. So tonight, there are a lot of things that we need to talk about. There's a lot of, as you know, many halachot in the laws of Pesach, a lot of things to talk about. We've spoken about them in previous years, Baruch Hashem, and of course, everything needs review, and that's why it says you have to start learning Halichot Pesach 30 days before the Chag, because all of these halachot are important to go ahead and to review them. I wanted to just kind of zone in the beginning of tonight's learning on a little bit of a different area that we haven't really spoken about, and that's actually some things that are very pertinent, very important for ladies to know as well, and that is the tefillot of the Chag of Pesach and of Yom Tov, and some halachot that come up about that. And then, Bli Neder, we will hopefully be able to go through at least some of the laws of the Seder, Be'ezrat Hashem. So we've got our hands full. So let us begin, Be'ezrat Hashem. We will go through these halachot now. So first of all, Tfilat Yom Tov, one of the ideas of the Yom Tov prayer is that it needs to be sung with beautiful songs. That's a very important thing. It's part of the Simchat HaChag to sing it, and that's very important as well. But it's important to know the halachot and the nuances that are there as well too. So one of the very interesting things that change on Yom Tov is that we say, Baruch Ata Hashem, Mekadesh Yisrael ve'azmanim. In the Amidah, we thank Hashem not only for the fact that we have the holiday, but that Hashem sanctified the Jewish people, and through the Jewish people, then we have the holidays. Why? Because as we just read this past week, HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chodashim, that the Jewish people are in control of when the month begins. Because whenever the Jewish people sanctify the new moon, then it's Rosh Chodesh. So by sanctifying the Jewish people and telling us HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Mekadesh Yisrael, then the Jewish people in turn go ahead and they're Mekadshim Hazmanim. They also sanctify the Jewish holidays as well. So that's one interpretation of that line. But it's important to know that that is very important to say, that there's a change in the Amidah. Mekadesh Yisrael v'Azmanim. What if a person only said in the Amidah, instead of Mekadesh Yisrael v'Azmanim, he said Mekadesh Yisrael? So then the person should fix it right away. Say v'Azmanim. If it's within Toch Kidei Dibur and the amount of time to say Shalom Alecha Rebbe, which is just like 3 seconds or so, so then fix it and add v'Hazmanim, right? And that Hashem, you sanctify the Jewish people and the times as well. If you did not, Chacham Ovadia Yosef Alav Hashalom writes that a person who even finished the entire Amidah still fulfilled their mitzvah. So even if a person only said Mekadesh Yisrael, they still fulfilled the obligation in the Amidah of Yom Tov. Okay, now this is a very interesting question that comes up in the laws of Yom Tov in general, not only Pesach, but in general. And the previous halacha also is not only Pesach, it comes up in general. We know ordinarily when we have Rosh Chodesh, which is what we just had yesterday, so we say Ya'aleh v'yavo. We add in that paragraph in the Amidah. Now, immediately following Ya'aleh v'yavo, we go into Modim. We say, "Ve'ata b'rachamecha avim tachbot zman v'titzenu, techezena adenu b'shemcha letzum rachamim, Baruch Ata Hashem, machazir shechinato leTzion," and then we bow down and we say, Modim, thank you, Hashem. So that means that what we're used to throughout the year is to say Ya'aleh v'yavo, and right after Ya'aleh v'yavo, we go into Modim. Now, here's the case that Chacham Ovadia talks about. He says, what happens if somebody is in the middle of Modim? He's saying, or she's saying, Modim anachtu lach, etc., right? Al shechiyat, al chayenu amisturim bi'adecha, We thank you, Hashem, for all of these things. And then all of a sudden, a red light flashes in the person's mind. And then the person says, wait a second, I don't know if I said Ya'aleh ve'yavo and then went into Modim like I normally do on Rosh Chodesh, or if I said what I'm supposed to, which is that on Yom Tov it changes. After Ya'aleh ve'yavo, then comes the paragraph V'hasienu, that we talk about the holiday, and then we say Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh Yisrael B'Azmanim, and then we go into Modim. So the person is in a doubt. She doesn't know whether or not she said Mekadesh Yisrael B'Azmanim, because it's possible that she did what she normally does on Rosh Chodesh, and she said Ya'aleh ve'yavo, and then found herself in the middle of Modim. So she's in a state of doubt. So says Chacham Ovadia Alav Shalom, in such a case, when a person doesn't know, we assume that they did it wrong. We assume that they did not say it right, and that they said it the way that they're accustomed to saying it on Rosh Chodesh, at which point we say that they have to go back to V'hasienu, which is the paragraph immediately following Ya'aleh ve'yavo, and then continue from there onward, finishing Mekadesh Yisrael B'Azmanim, and then saying again, Modim, etc. Because of the idea that there's a general rule in Halakha that we assume a person does what they're used to normally doing. And being that on Rosh Chodesh every month, what they normally do is they say Ya'aleh ve'yavo. So, and then after Ya'aleh ve'yavo, they say Modim. So we assume that if now this person has a doubt in their mind as to what they did, so then we assume that they didn't do what they were supposed to, this nuanced way of praying, which is the special one for Yom Tov, but rather they did what they're used to doing, which is Ya'aleh ve'yavo, and then followed by Modim, which is not the right thing to do, and they have to go back in and fix that. So that's a very interesting halakha that could potentially come up. Now, one of the big chidushim that comes up the night of Pesach specifically, in Eretz Yisrael, it's the first night only. And outside of Eretz Yisrael, it's the first night and the second night, is that this is the one time a year, the one time that Hallel is recited at nighttime. This is something that is accustomed by basically all Sephardic communities, all Hasidic communities, and some Lithuanian Ashkenazi communities, the ones that follow the opinion of the Vilna Gaon. All these communities, the night of Pesach, whether it's in Israel the first night or outside of Israel the first two nights, so we say Hallel with a blessing before and after, which is an incredible chidush. And the reason that it's done, it's brought down in different sources, that this was something that we were supposed to do in order to praise HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the fact that he redeemed us from Egypt. The Mefarshim explain that the night of Passover is very special in the sense that it's the exact same day the exodus of Egypt is returning to us that same night, just like Shabbat returns to us every week. It's the same Shabbat of creation. That same very special day that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created is coming back to us each week. It's called Shabbat. The night of the Seder is the same exact night that the Jewish people were redeemed. That moment is returning to us that very same night. That's why it says that a person has to view himself as if he left Egypt, meaning because at that very moment, the night of the Seder, that is the moment that the Jewish people are leaving Egypt. It's that same moment that they experienced then. That's what we're experiencing right now. And therefore, all the customs that the rabbis instituted to express freedom, to express strength, those customs are there because of the fact that it's a very special moment in history coming back to us again on this night. So for that reason, the rabbis said in the same way that the Jewish people praised the Kadosh Baruch Hu for having redeemed them from Egypt, so now we have an obligation to praise the Kadosh Baruch Hu for redeeming us from Egypt, because it's the same night. It's literally the same exact night, the same exact moment coming back to us, that same moment in history that we were there when we were redeemed, that very same moment is coming back to us at the night of the Seder. And that's why there's a special obligation to recite the Hallel with a blessing before and afterwards. And here's the key. This is the big chidush that we find no other time in the year, no other point in the year. There's even an obligation for women to say the Hallel the night of the Seder with a blessing before and after. And this is a real chidush, because as we always have been talking about in the past, we know that women are exempt from all time-bound mitzvot completely. A woman is exempt from lulav, she's exempt from sukkah, she's exempt from tefillin, she's exempt from tzitzit, she's exempt from shofar technically, she's exempt from all of these mitzvot. Why? Because the Torah tells us in different places that women are exempt from mitzvot that are limited to a certain time. And therefore, they're also exempt from Hallel. They never have an obligation to say Hallel, even when men do. On the days of Chanukah, they're exempt from Hallel, men are not. They have to say Hallel. On the days of Sukkot, men are obligated to say Hallel, women are exempt, right? But on this night of Pesach, by all the communities that have this custom, by the Sephardic communities, by the Hasidic communities, by the Lithuanian communities who follow the Vilna Gaon, by all of these communities, there's an obligation upon women as well to recite the Hallel with a blessing before and after. It's the most incredible thing. It's something very rare. It's a real novelty that you see that even women are obligated in the Hallel before and after. Now, this is something that's important to take note of, because this needs to be done before saying Kiddush. This has to get done before Kiddush. Why? Because we are going to say the Hallel, everybody together, in the recitation of the Haggadah itself. The only thing is that the Hallel that we say during the Haggadah is split up into two parts. The first two paragraphs are earlier, and the rest of the Hallel is found at the end of the Haggadah, right before we finish. So therefore, when we say the blessing on the Hallel, the night of Pesach, so we have in mind the Hallel that we're going to be saying later during the Haggadah as well. So this is something that even if a woman, Rav Ovadia writes himself, that even if a woman does not go to the synagogue, let's say she's going to be at home, she's not praying Arvit even, she's not doing any of that stuff, but the night of Pesach, there's a mitzvah to say Hallel, which is a real novelty, a very interesting thing. It's unique. You don't find this too often. Definitely you don't find Rav Ovadia saying that women should make a blessing on a time-bound mitzvah. It's almost never you find such a thing. But in this case, it's different. And therefore, he writes that women do make a blessing on the Hallel, the night of Pesach in Israel, the first night, outside of Israel, the first night and the second night. And by the way, if an American is going to Israel but plans on living his life in America, he's just there for the holiday, he still keeps 2 days. If an Israeli is coming to America and he's planning on living his life in Israel, he's just here to visit for the holiday, he keeps 1 day. So it's as if he's still in Israel, or that guy is still in America. So, the Israeli guy can't do melacha, he can't do labor publicly in our faces while we're keeping Yom Tov, but still, he would not recite Hallel the second night, at least definitely not with a blessing. Okay, so that's a very unique thing that comes up. Now, by the way, when it comes to Pesach, Pesach is a little bit different than Sukkot with respect to Hallel. Sukkot, Hallel is a complete Hallel all 8 days. From the beginning of Sukkot all the way until Shmini Atzeret, full Hallel is recited the entire time. When it comes to Pesach, however, only the first 2 days is full Hallel recited. But the rest of Pesach, it's only half Hallel. Why? Very interesting reason, something to really think about, actually. The Gemara tells us that the 7th day of Passover was the day that the sea split. And as we know, that was a big miracle for the Jewish people, where Hashem showed all the nations of the world that Hashem loves the Jewish people, and he let us travel through the water, get out safely, and the Egyptians drowned in the ocean as it closed on them, and they all died. So the malachim at that point, the angels, it says in the Midrash, started to sing. They started to praise Hashem. They started to say to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, praise Hashem for this tremendous miracle that the Jews are safe and that the Egyptians died. And Hashem told the malachim, Ma'aseh yadai tovim bayam, the work of my hands is drowning in the ocean. Ve'atem omrim shira, and you're going to say shira, you're going to sing now to me because at this kind of a moment. Now this is a very interesting claim. Think about it. If God forbid, I mean, in practical terms, let's say some Nazi was drowning in the water. One of the Nazis from the death camps, Hashem Yishmor, right? Let's say he was drowning in the water. Would we have any problem with that? Would we have any issue? A guy who tortured Jews, maybe even shot and killed Jews, would we have any issue with that person drowning and suffering a terrible death? I personally would not have any issue with it. He got what he deserved, right? So HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying over here, these are the same Egyptians that enslaved the Am Yisrael, that they deserve now to be punished. Hashem himself closed the water on them and caused them all to die a terrible suffering death. At the same moment is saying, but wait a second, these are the work of my hands. They shouldn't, you shouldn't be singing at this point. Very interesting. Something to think about. HaKadosh Baruch Hu even cares about them. In a way, it's a lesson for us to also, even when somebody does something very bad, something very terrible, to still emulate HaKadosh Baruch Hu and say, hey, maybe I should have feelings or care in a sense about that person. Maybe there's a way to help. Just a thought. At any rate, halakha l'maaseh is that because of that, we don't say a full Hallel on the last days of Passover. And being that the last days of Passover, we don't say a full Hallel, so it wouldn't be proper for the Chol HaMoed to have a full Hallel and the last day of Passover to not have a full Hallel. That would be a little bit imbalanced, that the Yom Tov doesn't have a full Hallel, but Chol HaMoed, the weekdays within the Yom Tov, do. So therefore, the entire Chol HaMoed is equal to the end of the days of Passover, and therefore it's only half Hallel. It's a Hallel with a little bit of a twist, that there's a certain element here of us not being happy because of what happened to the Egyptians. Amazing thing to think about. So therefore, we say a full Hallel not only in the daytime, but also at nighttime. The minhag of the Sfaradim is, and let me be clear, even if a person is not with a minyan, very interesting, like last year, for example, when the shuls were closed at this time of the year, and there were no minyanim around, still the minhag of the Sfaradim is to say at nighttime, the first and second night, a full Hallel with blessings before and after. Amazing thing, even women, even though it's a time-bound mitzvah. So you see, this is a very special thing, and it's important to be aware of this obligation. Okay. Do we have any questions before we move on? If yes, we could stop and take them now. If not, we could move on. Okay, great. So let us continue. So now, the night of the Seder this year is tricky for a number of reasons. But so we covered some of them last week, Baruch Hashem. Now, I'd like to talk about a few other issues that come up. First of all, you have to remember to light a yahrzeit candle before the Chag this year. The reason is because on Yom Tov, you're not allowed to light a flame just from a match. You can only light a fire from a pre-existing fire. That's the halakha on Yom Tov. So therefore, Motzei Shabbat, you have to make sure that you have a fire that you can use to light. Light your Shabbat candles, sorry, not Shabbat candles, your Yom Tov candles with, as well as a fire to use to light your Havdalah candle. Because in the middle of the Kiddush that we're going to say at the Seder this year, we also are going to be saying Havdalah, because we're going from Shabbat to a Yom Tov, and therefore we have to separate between Shabbat, the holiness of Shabbat, and the holiness of Yom Tov. It's two different levels of sanctity. Shabbat is on a higher level of sanctity than Yom Tov, so we have to make sure that we distinguish between the two, but at the same time, we don't say Mavdil ben Kodesh lechol, we say Mavdil ben Kodesh lekodesh, that Hashem distinguishes between the two different levels of Kedusha, of sanctity. So now we have to make sure that we have that candle ready and available for us to go ahead and to light the candle of Havdalah and the candles of Yom Tov. You have to pay special attention not to light Yom Tov candles early this year, because you have to make sure that Shabbat ends first. Only once Shabbat ends can you light your Yom Tov candles. If a person goes ahead and keeps the opinion of Rabbeinu Tam, that he waits 72 minutes after sunset until Shabbat, only then does he stop Shabbat, meaning only then does Shabbat end for him. So then the same thing applies this year too. He cannot light, or she cannot light the candles until 72 minutes after sunset, if that's what they normally do for Shabbat. If they hold of the earlier Zman, then they can follow the earlier Zman. But the point is, you cannot do anything until Shabbat is over. So now, when you light your Shabbat, your Yom Tov candles, there's always this pitfall that people forget about. The average person, usually, once they finish with their match, they simply shake it off and they extinguish it. But not so on Yom Tov. That cannot happen on Yom Tov, because you're not allowed to extinguish on Yom Tov either. So therefore, what a person should do is take that match and either place it on a piece of tin foil or place it in the sink and let it burn out, and no harm will be done. But you cannot extinguish it directly. You have to put it on something and let it burn out. Therefore, it's a wise idea when making Havdalah during the Kiddush not to take a huge Havdalah candle and light it, because that would be something that you can't extinguish. You can't. It's going to have to burn all the way till the end. So therefore, try and find something that isn't like a huge Havdalah candle, maybe a regular candle, and you put a match next to it, something like that. Smaller candle, a tea light maybe, and that will be able to help you to do the mitzvah. But don't extinguish the match. That's very important as well. Get yourself a yortzeit candle and light from that ahead of time. Now, let's continue. Another point about the prayers of Yom Tov. It's important to know that when it comes to Pesach, there's a bit of a difference between Pesach and Sukkot. On Sukkot, we switch to the prayer of Mashiv HaRuach U'Morid HaGeshem all the way at the end of Sukkot. Meaning, when it comes Shmini Atzeret, Musaf time, the 8th day of Sukkot, basically, it's its own holiday, it's Shmini Atzeret. At Musaf, we go ahead and we switch from Morid Hatal, the Sephardic communities, Nusach Sfarad say it, the Ashkenazim don't say anything. But at that point, everyone starts to say, Mashiv HaRuach U'Morid HaGeshem. Why don't we start earlier at the beginning of Sukkot? The reason is because we don't want to mention rain on the holiday of Sukkot, because we want to be able to sit in the Sukkah. And if we're praying for rain at that moment, the rain wouldn't be a blessing for us, because it would not let us sit in the Sukkah. So therefore, after we fulfill the mitzvah of the Sukkah, that's when we start praying for rain. So that's why we find it all the way at the end of the 8 days by Shmini Atzeret Musaf time. However, when it comes to switching back to Morid Hatal, for the communities that say it, that takes place right away. So the first day of Pesach, when we go ahead and we do Musaf, that's when we switch to Morid Hatal. So that's something to watch out for as well. A lot of times women don't go to shul, but they pray at home. So they're not there to hear the announcement. Okay, now we're switching to Morid Hatal. It's important to know. When do we switch to Morid Hatal? First day of Passover, not the end of Passover, the first day. When? By Musaf time. So the Shacharit of Pesach, you're still saying Mashiv HaRuach U'Morid HaGeshem, the first prayer of Shach, meaning Arvit and Shacharit in the morning. You're saying Mashiv HaRuach U'Morid HaGeshem. But Musaf, already you switch over to Morid Hatal. So that's very important as well. Now, this year, we have a better opportunity to be able to be awake at the Seder. The night of the Seder is very important for everybody to be awake and to have their full strength. And it's important to be awake and to have that strength all throughout the night of the Seder, not to be drowsy, not to doze off, but to be in full force. Now, normally what we do in such a case is we have people, you go to sleep during the daytime, and that way you have strength for the Seder, the night of the Seder. Now on Shabbat, it's definitely a good thing this year that Erev Pesach is Shabbat to go to sleep. Just be careful not to say that I'm going to sleep now to have strength for the Seder. That's something that would be like disrespectful to Shabbat. But make sure that you get that power nap, or at least or an hour or two in, so that you do have the strength for the night of the Seder, so that you're not plotzing by the time the Seder comes around. It should be actually a little bit easier this year because we're not running until the last moment, and you have the ability to have a lot of energy left for the Seder. So that's very important to make sure that we do that. The reason is because even the children, we want to make sure that they go to sleep, they get a nap during Shabbat, because we want them to be awake for the night of Seder. Everything that we do is really revolving around the children. The word Haggadah, which means to speak, to say, comes from the verse in the Torah which says, right? You shall tell your son on this day, saying, because of this Korban Pesach, Hashem, right, took us out of Egypt, and therefore it's all about teaching the children, instructing the children, and whoever, it doesn't have to be children. If it's not children that are there, if it's adults that are there, it's about teaching them. Even says the Gemara, if the person is not with anybody, let's say like last year, unfortunately, some people were even alone by themselves. Even still, they have a mitzvah to talk about the exodus from Egypt. And this leads us to the next mitzvah, which is the mitzvah, the night of the Seder, called Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim. The mitzvah of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim is a mitzvah that applies equally to everybody, to men and to women. This is the mitzvah where we have an obligation to tell over the story of what happened to the Jewish people in Egypt, how they were treated, how they were tortured, whatever took place to them, and how Hashem saved them. And every little detail that you add for this, in anything that you say, is considered to be another mitzvah. Famously, the Haggadah tells us in describing the depth of this mitzvah, it talks about how the greatest of the sages, who obviously knew all the details by far better than all of us, still made an effort to talk about it all night long until the students came and told them, Rabotenu, right? That now the time of Shema in the morning has come, and it's time to go pray. So they were staying up all night long talking about this. Why? What's the purpose? The purpose is there's a mitzvah. The Torah tells us a mitzvah to tell over the story of what happened in Egypt the night of Pesach. It's a special mitzvah. Now, how does a person do this? In order to do this mitzvah, you have to be prepared ahead of time. You have to make sure that you go ahead and for yourself, for your husband, you get some literature, either even if it's the Midrash says, the little Midrash says, books that talk about what happened. There are some beautifully illustrated Haggadot. Rabbi Baruch Chait has one that's fantastic. And he goes through every little detail. The more details you say over, that's the mitzvah, everybody. You see, a lot of times people get confused. Rabbi Chaim Friedlander says this in Siftei Chaim. He says a lot of times people get hung up on talking about the Haggadah, about questions on the Haggadah. Why does it say this, not that? And details in terms of that, which is good. It's also mitzvah. But he says, but the main focus of the night of Pesach really is supposed to be discussion about the story of the exodus of Egypt. What happened? More details. You can talk about everything. There's so many things. Each time that you review it, every year you'll learn new things. It's an amazing thing. Talk about the size of the locusts, how much they ate, how they took out all the food, there was nothing left, and all what the hail destroyed, and how the frog was a tremendous frog that came and they were hitting it, and then rivers of frogs came out of its mouth, and they even went into the ovens, and they were willing to kill themselves for Hashem, and how the sea, the Nile River turned into blood. This is the reason I'm saying this is because this is the halacha. That's what I'm trying to convey over here. The saying over of these stories is what the halacha requires. That's what I'm trying to say. It's Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim. The halacha, every time that you say over to your child something in this area, or to anybody for that matter, You are fulfilling the mitzvah of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim. V'chol hamarbe lesaper, right? It says the Haggadah, anybody who increases, harei zeh meshubach. That's even better. That's more praiseworthy. Because this is the night where a person is supposed to feel basically like a king, to show the world that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is with us and saved us and loves us, and therefore we are on top of the world on this night. All the rest of the year, when we feel like we're on top of the world, it's for no reason. We're not on top of the world, and there's no reason to feel arrogant or haughty. The opposite. Hashem takes a person like that, mashpil ge'imadaretz. Hashem takes that person and puts him down to the ground, because Hashem doesn't want haughtiness. But the Mefarshim write that this night, a person, the night of the Seder, is supposed to act like he's really on top of the world in commemoration of what HaKadosh Baruch Hu did for Am Yisrael. Not because of ourselves, we're nothing, but it's because of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that he took us and made us into a nation. So that's a very important element, and that requires preparation. It's a great idea to, if you're going shopping, get yourselves some candies to give out to the kids the night of the Seder. Keep them involved, keep them asking questions, get them to do things, bribe them with candy. It's okay. Every little thing counts. This is what's brought down in the Halacha. The Rambam writes, the Sugya in Shas, Masechet Pesachim writes this, that a person should give his children special treats on Pesach, just so that the child stays up and says, why on earth are you giving me these treats? I beg for these things all the time. You say no, you give me a hard time. Now you're just handing them out freely. The kid's going to say, what's going on, right? The answer is because we want the kid to be involved. We want them to ask what's going on. That's why we're saying the child is there in order to be involved, to hear the story. And that's the object of your mitzvah, to tell your child, to tell anyone who's there exactly what is it that happened the night of the Seder. And like I said, that requires work. You have to listen to shiurim, you have to get yourself sfarim and go through the details. And that's how you will have an arsenal of things to be able to tell your children at the night of the Seder. Anyone who adds more in this area is doing a tremendous mitzvah. So that's something that is really important for all of us to know about the mitzvah of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim. And that mitzvah applies, like I said, to men and to women equally. Everybody has to do that. So that's something that we really should be thinking about, very much so. Now, so like I said, make sure they get their sleep, make sure they rest, so that they're awake and they're pumped up for the Seder. Okay. Another thing to think about is the mitzvah of ofspirato Omer, which begins the night after the first night of Yom Tov, which this year is going to be on Sunday night. So Motzei Shabbat is the first night of Yom Tov. Motzei, the first night of Yom Tov, going into the second night, is when we count ofspirato Omer for the first time. Now, bear in mind, first of all, it's important for us to know that women, like I said before, women are 100% exempt from counting ofspirato Omer. We count each night in order to get closer as we count up towards the day that we receive the Torah. And that's a very special mitzvah. But remember that it's a time-bound mitzvah, which means that women are 100% exempt from this mitzvah. And this brings us back to the old argument between the Ashkenazi Psak and the Sephardic Psak, according to most Sephardic rabbis, whether or not if a woman chooses to do it, she takes the option of doing it even though she's exempt, whether or not she's allowed to say a blessing over it. The Ashkenazi Psak is that they are allowed to say a blessing over it, and they're following the idea that it's a blessing for anybody who's doing the mitzvah. It's made for anybody who's involved in that mitzvah. That's one approach. But the Sephardic approach is that women that are exempt from the mitzvah are not allowed to say a blessing. They're allowed to do the mitzvah. They're allowed to count the Omer, but they're not allowed to say a blessing over the Omer, because remember, whenever we say a blessing over a mitzvah, the formula that we use is Asher Kiddushanu, that Hashem, you have sanctified us, the mitzvotav, with his commandments, Vetzivanu, and has commanded us to do X, Y, and Z. So Hashem has commanded us to count the Omer. So the claim that the Sephardic rabbis have said is that Hashem didn't command women to count ofspirato omer. So if a woman decides that she wants to do it, so she should not say a blessing over it because of the fact that she is not commanded to count the ofspirato omer. So therefore, no blessing should be recited over the counting of ofspirato omer. Now, in truth, the poskim do bring down that Kabbalistically, it's actually better for a woman not to count ofspirato omer at all, to just not even do the mitzvah. I don't have an explanation as to why, but the Ben Ish Chai brings it down, and so do many other Sephardic poskim. So therefore, if you refrain entirely from ofspirato omer, there's absolutely no problem whatsoever. But if you do choose to do it, then do so without saying a blessing. If you're Sephardic, if you're Ashkenazi, you have the right to say a blessing as well. Okay, so that's very, very important as well. Now, let us begin, Be'ezat Hashem, to talk a little bit about the Seder. There's so much to speak about when it comes to Leila Seder. The first thing that we have to remind ourselves is that when we do the main mitzvot that express freedom, that express happiness and joy, it's so important to remember one incredible halacha that we do all throughout these mitzvot, which is that we recline to the left. If a person, and this is for men and for women, nowadays we say that women recline as well. And it's so important that some say that if a person did not recline to the left, then he did not fulfill his mitzvah of doing this mitzvah. So when do we recline? Let's get it clear. So first of all, when we say kiddush, the first part of the Seder is kadesh. We say kiddush, and we're in a tremendous state of joy. We're very happy, and we say kiddush. So at the end of the long kiddush, sometimes it's very hard to remember because there's so much being said, especially this year, that there's an entire havdalah inserted into the middle of kiddush. But you got to remember that when you sit down to drink your cup, you have to make sure that you recline to the left. The reason that we recline is to show freedom. Look at how much the rabbis cared that we show our freedom this night, that we show that we can be comfortable and lean to the left like people who are on top of the world, right? The rabbi said if a person doesn't do it, then he missed the mitzvah completely. He has to go back and do it again. So therefore, a person should make sure that he reclines to the left and does the mitzvah properly. Now, reclining to the left is supposed to be an enjoyable experience. A lot of times you find people, I remember hearing this from Rabbi Belsky, a lot of times you see people doing like a mid-air type of thing and it's not comfortable. And that's not what the goal was. If you find somebody going like, this in the middle, like that, and then he's in the middle of the air, it's not the exact idea. A person could make it much easier for himself, either by turning his chair around and leaning on the chair, right? And having it nice and comfortable. Perhaps he can he can turn his seat around, lean on the table and be much more comfortable and lean to the left. But the point is that you want to make it a nice and comfortable experience for yourself and not just be like in midair and God forbid, find yourself having a hard time gulping down the wine. That's not the goal. You want to make it nice and comfortable. Some people bring pillows so that they're cushioning their body from maybe the table. That's a little bit harder. Whatever the case may be, do it in a way that's comfortable and enjoyable. Now, I want to stress one more thing while we're in the topic of Kiddush. Pesach is not a time to go cheap. Meaning, what I'm trying to say is like this. Pesach is brought down that, like we said, we're trying to show that we're free people, that we're on top of the world. Why? Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu raised us to the top of the world. We were the bottom of the barrel, slaves on the 49th level of Tumah, but Hashem came and took us out of that and brought us up to the heights of heights as we were on our way to get the Torah. So it's brought down that a person should make sure that on the night of Pesach, he uses his finest utensils, not plastic paper, cheap stuff. Even if you're having a lot of people at the Seder, it's the right way of doing it, the halacha says, is to use the finest utensils that you have. If a person can't afford to go ahead and to get a nice set of things for Pesach, then he should do the best that they can. But if a person can, he really should opt to use his nice, finest china, fine glasses, and there are many Kabbalistic implications to these things. For example, kos in Hebrew means a cup, and it's the same gematria as Elokim, 86. When you use a fine cup, the Kaf HaChaim brings down that silver, especially, you use a fine silver cup for your Seder, that's a very special moment in Shamayim, that you're sweetening the judgments. It's tremendous things that happen by using your finest jewelry, not jewelry, I mean to say your finest utensils, jewelry as well for the Chag, of course, it's very important too. But the point that I'm trying to bring is, don't just try and say, oh, well, I'm going to have a very hard cleanup, so therefore let me get paper, plastic, and whatever disposable stuff, and I'll throw it all in the garbage. Incorrect. As a matter of fact, one of the great Rishonim, I believe it was the Maharil, used to, I guess he used to lend money to people, and he would take collateral from them, different objects, and he would just put them on the table the night of the Seder as a display, just for beauty, just for the sake of beauty. Just because the more you enhance the Seder, the greater the mitzvah, the greater you're accomplishing in the spiritual realm, in the spiritual world. And that's a big deal, the night of the Seder. So don't try and, if a person is afraid of the cleanup, then maybe it's worthwhile to get a little extra help and try and make sure that the cleanup is easier. The opposite, that's a very good thing, because that shows that, again, you have this night of the Seder, you're free, you have a tremendous ability to do whatever it is that you need and enjoy it. So that's a very important thing to think about the night of the Seder, to use your finest utensils for the Seder, not to try and get around it in a kind of second-rate way. So that's very important as well. When it comes to Kiddush, the first part of the Seder, Kadesh, so we use red wine. That's something which is brought down in the Halacha, Minhag of the Sfaradim, brought down in Shulchan Aruch, specifically to use red wine for Kiddush. If a person can, if it's possible, it's brought down that wine that's not nevushal is considered to be on a higher level. If a person can have wine that's not nevushal, it's technically better, but it's very risky, especially if you have help around the house, because if you have non-Jewish help that is moving things and taking things, cleaning up things, then already you have a big issue, because a lot of times they're going to move the bottle and then you can't have the wine anymore. And somebody might not even be aware and might drink it, and that's already a violation. So therefore, to play it safe, people get wine that's mevushal, and it's still just as good and just as acceptable as wine that's not mevushal. So if a person wants to get that is perfectly okay as well. Does one fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush with grape juice? Yes, you still can fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush with grape juice. However, if a person can push himself, you have to understand, all you need is a cup that holds 3 ounces of wine. You don't need to have a cup that holds more. Now, how much do you need to fulfill the mitzvah? How much do you actually need to drink? The majority of that cup. So let's say 1.6 ounces of wine. It's not that much. So therefore, there's no question that when you have a real wine, that wine is more a symbol of freedom and an expression of enjoyment and happiness and satisfaction than grape juice. So therefore, if a person can, it would be better to do so. However, not to minimize at all, I did see that Zecher Tzaddik v'Kadosh Livachar Ovadia Alav Shalom actually did the mitzvah with grape juice. So therefore, there's no question on earth that you're fulfilling the mitzvah with grape juice. However, if a person can use wine, I think that would be definitely better. I remember asking Rabbi Belsky Alav Shalom, that's what he held, that you should use wine if you can. And again, it's not that much. All you need is a cup that holds 3 ounces of wine, and then you can drink majority of it, and you did the mitzvah. That's it. 3 ounces is really a small amount. It's not that much. However, on the other hand, if you have a larger cup, you do need to drink the majority of the cup. So it's a worthwhile investment, if you can, to get yourself a cup that's smaller if it's harder for you to drink a larger amount If you have a very large cup and it's hard for you to consume that much, then it's something which, it's worth thinking about how to work that out. But ideally, you should have the whole cup. If not the whole cup, majority of the cup. But still, remember, you don't need to have the very least rov revi'it, which is about 1.6 fluid ounces. It's not that much, as long as the cup holds 3 ounces. Okay, so that's important. So remember that when it comes to Kiddush, we have this year Havdalah in the Kiddush, and then afterwards, when you finally get to the point where you sit down and you have the wine, you recline to the left and then you drink it. We don't recline to the right, we only recline to the left. Now, remember as well that there's a difference in custom between the Ashkenazim and the Sfaradim when it comes to Kiddush. As we pretty much universally, everybody says Kiddush on Friday night. The head of the household says Kiddush for the entire family, and then everyone drinks from the cup, and that's it, right? On the night of Pesach by the Ashkenazim, the custom is that each person has his own cup of wine, and each person says his own Kiddush. Very interesting. By the Sfaradim, it's the same as regular Friday night. One person leads the Kiddush and says it on behalf of everybody. So that's important to be aware of as well if you're going somewhere else. Okay, so very good. I just want to point out a couple of other points. The holy books write that, I want to read to you actually inside something that I saw from a beautiful Sefer Or Halacha. He says the following. He says, Vadai belayla kadosh v'chashuv kazeh. He says you should be very, very aware. There's no question on a holy night and a special night like this, mechapes hasatan le'arer et kol hasimcha v'sason. The Satan is he's searching for a way to undo all the happiness, to shake all the happiness and rejoicing that is supposed to be on this night. Lachen, he says, therefore, if a person has in his heart even just a little bit of anger, hadavar mesukan meod, it's very, very dangerous. At that moment, the Satan has a little item to be able to attach himself to, through which he can spark a fire and light up the entire fire of machloket in the house on this very special night. So for that reason, you have to be aware. Forewarned is forearmed. The Satan is doing anything and everything in his power to mess up the greatness of this night. If you have in your heart at that moment something that upsets you about your husband, something that upsets you about your kids, something that upsets you about one of the guests, she said this and he said that, and how could they, and how this and how that, at that moment you have to realize this is the Satan. This is Yetzer Hara. It's trying to get me to destroy my Shalom Bayit and trying to destroy my Seder tonight, because it knows that if we have a peaceful Shalom Bayit tonight at our Seder, we can accomplish tremendous spiritual accomplishments. So therefore, it's our job. Everyone has to be alert and ready to nip such a thing in the bud the night of the Seder, not to allow anything even remotely close to happen like that. Says the Chida beautifully, this is one... This is one of the things that is in the list of the Seder. We say Kadesh, Urchatz, Karpas, Yakats, Magid Rochza, Motzi Matzah. What does it mean, Motzi Matzah? Motzi means that we say Hamotzi on the matzah, and we also say Asher Kiddushanu Mitzvah Tzvanu Al Achilat Matzah over the matzah. But he says the word matzah many times we find in Tanakh could mean a fight, a quarrel. He says therefore you have to make sure Motzi Matzah. Don't allow the fight, don't allow the quarrel to make its way into the night of the Seder, because there's no question that Satan wants to make that happen. But it's our job to make sure that we don't make it happen. I'm focusing on these things, even though there's so many more halachot and details to talk about, but this is something which is very important to be on top of as well, to make sure going in that we know that such things could happen, and our job is to make sure that we don't let it happen. So that's very important as well. Okay, let us continue. So we start off with Kadesh. We said kiddush. Now, urchatz. Urchatz is the next step where we go and we wash our hands in honor of what? Karpas. Why? What is the idea of karpas? So usually we use celery. Some Ashkenazim use a potato. But by my custom is we take celery and then we dip it in salt water. What's the idea? Why do we have to wash our hands? We go and we wash our hands and we don't do it with a blessing, by the way. Why? What's the idea? Says the Taz. The Taz goes ahead and gives a lengthy discussion over here. And he says the idea is the same halakha that we've spoken about in the past, which applies all year long, which is that whenever you have any kind of vegetable or any kind of fruit that is tibulo b'mashke, which means that it's been dipped into one of the 7 liquids, like we've spoken about in the past, yad shachat dam, which stands for wine, honey, oil, milk, dew, also blood and water, which normally blood doesn't happen, but any of those other liquids that these things are dipped in, the halakha says that a person who goes to eat them, if he's going to put his hands on it directly and if it's still wet, he needs to wash his hands first. Regular netilat yadayim. Just like when it comes to bread. And unless he dries it. If he dries it, he will not have to wash his hands. But over here, we're having it wet. We're having the vegetable dipped into the karpas while it's liquidy. Therefore, we have an obligation to wash our hands before that. And just like all year long, if let's say we had wet grapes, for example, they're sopping wet, we would wash our hands without saying a blessing. So too here, we go ahead and we wash our hands without saying a blessing. So this is a very important halakha. It comes up tonight because it comes up the night of the Seder because it comes up all year long. So therefore, it's important to be aware of that as well. Now, we go ahead and we take the karpas and we dip it in the salt water. The salt water represents the tears of the Jewish people. That's salty because of all the slavery that they were going through. And the karpas itself is an amazing thing. The Mefarshim point out, I heard this from Rabbi Pesach Kron, and others point out as well, that the karpas itself was actually one of the was the color Rashi brings down of the ketonet pasim, of the coat of Yosef that Yaakov Avinu had given over to Yosef, which had caused a tremendous amount of jealousy between Yosef and his brothers, because of which they had decided to then sell Yosef down to Egypt, which ultimately was, as he became the king, the second king of Egypt, that was how he got all of his family to go down to Egypt, which actually was the root of the entire slavery in Egypt. So it's important for us to remember, that's why we have the karpas. How exactly did we get to Egypt to begin with? What was the idea over there? And the answer was that it started off with the fight between the brothers, between Yosef and his brothers, that they were so upset with him, they were so jealous of him, that he was favored by his father. So therefore, it's so important for us to realize that the night of Pesach is all about the opposite, trying to become closer with one another, trying to have love for our family, love for each other. That's something that we have to focus on as well. That's why the karpas is there, to remember how we got to Egypt to begin with, and then we dip it in the salt water to remember all the tears that came along with that. Next, so we have kadesh, urchatz, karpas, and then we go to Yakats. Now, before we move on to Yakats, we have to remember just one more point about the karpas. It's very important to make sure to eat less than a kazait of karpas. The reason is, a kazait is, we say, 28 grams. The reason that we have to have less than that is because there's a big argument amongst the poskim. When you're about to go into a meal, like whether it doesn't have to be the night of Pesach, anytime, you know you're about to have a big meal with bread. And now beforehand, you just had something that warrants a bracha achrona. Let's say you just had a kazait of, strawberries, okay? So now you have to say borei nefashot. But at the same time, you know that you're about to go wash and say hamotzi on the meal you're about to have. So there's a big argument amongst the poskim. What does one do in such a circumstance? Does he say borei nefashot, the after blessing on the strawberries, and then go and wash and say hamotzi? Or does the fact that he's about to say hamotzi now make it that the after blessing the Birkat HaMazon of his meal, will exempt the strawberries that he had before the meal. That's a big debate amongst the authorities. And one opinion is that he should say Borei Nefashot first. The other opinion is that he should not say Borei Nefashot, rather the Birkat HaMazon will exempt it. So being that we don't want to get into an argument between the different rabbis, what we do is we say, don't eat enough that would make you have to say Borei Nefashot. Have less than a kazait. What happens if a person actually did have a kazait? For some reason, they were very hungry. They needed to have a lot of celery, and they had a lot of karpas for that reason. So what should they do? The answer is we would tell them not to say Borei Nefashot. We would say Safek Brachot Le'akel, which means that you don't, whenever there's a question as to whether or not you say the blessing or not, we say don't say the blessing and let the Birkat HaMazon exempt it. But again, ideally, we don't want to get into that question to begin with, so we tell everybody to have less than a kazayit. Okay, so that's very important to be aware of. Now, we go into Yakats. Yakats is when we take out of the 3 matzot that we have in front of us, the head of the table is supposed to have in front of him a Seder plate. You can find it in any Haggadah exactly the order of the plate, and it's based on Kabbalistic teachings of the Arizal. And on the, or under many times the Seder plate, you have 3 levels of matzot. You have 3 different matzot. Over here, Yakats, the head of the household, is going to take the matzah and he's going to break it in half. Now, the idea of having a broken, first of all, why 3? Number 1, every Shabbat, as you know, we take 2 loaves of bread, lechem mishneh. So over here, it's no different. We get on Erev Yom Tov a special portion, right? So therefore, we have lechem mishneh as well. So those are the 2. Why is there a 3rd one? Because the bread that we're supposed to have is called lechem oni. Lechem oni means poor man's bread. And poor men, they don't have bread in nice whole amounts. They have it, broken in pieces. So therefore, we have lechem oni. And when we make the bracha, we're going to make the bracha on all 3 of those matzot together, right? That's going to be where we talk about motzi matzah. Now, 1/2 of it stays underneath the, in between the 2 matzot. The other gets taken and hidden away for the afikoman. Some say that you should try and make the break in the matzah, in the middle matzah, one in the shape of a dalid and one in the shape of a vav. It's a little bit difficult to do that. I never end up getting it right. But either way, 1/2 is underneath, in between the 2 matzot, and the other half is taken and put away for the afikoman. And again, this is something that is supposed to keep the children awake. It's something that's supposed to get them to be excited about the Seder. The idea that if they would go and would find the afikoman, that they would get some kind of a gift, that's something that's going to keep them up. It's going to keep them excited for the Seder. Like we said before, the excitement of the children is everything the night of the Seder. Make sure that they're very excited, that they're going to get a special gift, a special present. It's not for adults, by the way. It's not for, it doesn't, there's no such thing to give an adult an afikoman present. It's to keep the kids excited. That's the whole purpose of it. So that's important. Be'ezrat Hashem, I think that we're going to talk about the rest of the Halichot of the Seder, Hashem, I believe next week, because it looks like we are running out of time for tonight. But if we have any questions, we could take them now. And Bli Neder, next week, we will try to finish up the rest of the Halichot of the Seder. Any questions before we call it a night? Okay. All right, everybody. Fantastic. Hashem will continue next week, and we will see you then. Chazakim u'buchim, everybody. Call 2.
Thank you.